Part 1. The Cartel. The nation-state, as a fundamental unit of man's organized life, has ceased to be the principal creative force. International banks and multinational corporations are acting and planning in terms that are far in advance of the political concepts of the nation-state. Zbigniew Brzezinski, Between Two Ages. America's Role in the Technotronic Era, 1971. There exists a shadowy government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own fundraising mechanism, and the ability to pursue its own ideas of national interest, free from all the checks and balances, and free from the law itself. Daniel K. Inouye, U.S. Senator, 1977. Some even believe we, Rockefeller family, are part of a secret cabal, working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. David Rockefeller, Memoirs, 2002. Chapter 1. Snake Oil. If thou, Columbia, dost from this thy sun, the condor beak and python eyes recoil, bethink thee of the years that freedom's soil was husbanded by devil feet, which run to scatter lies and wrongs, until thereon huge growths do thrive, once meadow by the toil of pioneers, where now resort for spoil the mouths and beaks that hunt for carrion. In years to come, if men mid the debris of this republic shall explore the cause of vast decay, two faces will appear: the perjured marshal, who with sorcery planted the jungle of unequal laws, and this huge reptile, now a nation's fear. Edgar Lee Masters, on a picture of John D. Rockefeller. In the midst of the 19th century, Dr. William Bill Livingston traveled throughout the Northeast states peddling Seneca oil, which he claimed was a surefire cure for cancer. The medicine was his homemade concoction of liquid paraffin, calomel, Epsom salts, and petroleum. The oil came from a salt well in Tarentum, outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He named his product Seneca, after a group of Iroquoian-speaking Indians who lived in upper New York State before the American Revolution. At $25 a pint, the concoction was incredibly pricey in that time, when the wages for an average American laborer were less than $6 a week. But Dr. Livingston assured all those who gathered to listen to him at his medical show that the cost was well worth the result. A single bottle, he claimed, can cure all cases of cancer, unless they are too far gone. A small side effect. But Dr. Bill warned that the concoction should not be administered to pregnant women, since a few spoonfuls would likely cause an instantaneous abortion. As a physician, Livingston said, I am duty-bound to warn you of this side effect. This side effect was always of interest to a few of the young men in the audience, who were willing to empty their pockets for a small sampling of the medicine. A towering figure with a thick auburn beard, Dr. Bill, wearing a top hat and black waistcoat, spoke with a sonorous voice and possessed a pleasing appearance and a magnetic charm that evolved confidence from his listeners. His medical show was successful enough for him to keep 2 wives, 8 children, 2 separate households, and a stable of mistresses. A horse thief and child molester. Everything, however, about the charismatic doctor was bogus. He was not a physician. He had never received any medical training, not even as an orderly in a rural hospital. The medicine that he sold from the back of his black wagon could not cure cancer, but it could produce such severe abdominal cramping in women that abortions often occurred. And his name was not William Livingston, but rather William Avery Rockefeller. In addition to the fleecing marks far and wide of their hard-earned cash, Dr. Bill, also known as Devil Bill, was a horse thief who often tied an unattended stallion to the back of his wagon before leaving town. He was a gifted card shark and notorious child molester. The good doctor avoided prosecution in Cayuga County, New York, for raping a 15-year-old girl by hightailing it for Cleveland. A father's lesson. When he wasn't absent from his first wife and children, peddling his medicine or running away from the law, Devil Bill taught his kids the fine art of cheating. "I cheat my sons every chance I get," he bragged of his parenting technique. "I want to make 'em sharp. I trade with the boys and skin 'em, and I just beat 'em every time I can. I want to make 'em sharp." Even as a boy, John D., the eldest of Devil Bill's sons, represented a perfect example of homo economicus. He kept his weekly allowance so that he could buy candy by the pound. He divided the candy into small portions that he sold to his siblings and classmates. By age 7, he was dropping gold, silver, and copper coins into a blue china bowl on the mantel. By this time, he had developed his own business coup by shadowing turkeys as they waddled into the woods, raided their nests, and raised the chicks for sale. Naked ambition. In early photos, John D. appears grim and expressionless, lacking any sense of boyish joy or animation. His skin is drawn, and his small dark eyes appear blank and lusterless. To the residents of Moravia, New York, where John D. spent his childhood, he always seemed abstracted. They remembered him with a deadpan face, trudging along the country roads, lost in thought. And his thought, even as a child, was set. He wanted to become the world's wealthiest man and to live 100 years. At 16, John D. dropped out of school to become a bookkeeper for Hewitt & Tuttle, a Cleveland brokerage firm that specialized in the importing of iron ore. 2 years later, he established his own business with Maurice Clark, an Englishman who worked at a produce house. The firm, called Clark and Rockefeller, specialized in the sale of commodities, including meat and grain. The outbreak of the Civil War proved to be a great boon for the new business, which secured a contract to provide produce to the Union Army. By the war's end, Rockefeller had amassed a tidy fortune of $250,000. Drake's Folly. A new commodity arising from the farming backwoods of western Pennsylvania now attracted John D.'s attention. Colonel Edwin Drake, who was not really a colonel, erected a tall wooden structure known as a derrick and began drilling for oil with equipment used in salt wells. His notion of drilling for oil made him the laughingstock of the small town Titusville. But the laughter stopped on August 28, 1859, when oil began to gush from the ground and to fill the pails that Drake had placed within the derrick. A whole new industry was born overnight. Drake proved that through drilling, oil could be found in abundance and produced cheaply. Before 1850, oil was not a precious commodity. Quacks like Devil Bill used it to treat a variety of diseases, including consumption and diphtheria, and paraffin, developed in 1830, was used to make candles and to lubricate machinery. Kerosene was invented by Dr. Abraham Gessner in 1848, by distilling coal to produce a clear fluid. But this method of making kerosene was expensive and kept kerosene lamps from use in average households. In 1853, a new method of producing kerosene was discovered by washing crude oil with sulfuric acid. The possibility now loomed that oil could be used to light the lamps of the world. By the end of the decade, thanks to Drake's Folly, the oil rush began. A grandiose scheme. Realizing that the possibility of incredible wealth was at stake, John D. approached the directors of the Bank of Cleveland for a multi-million-dollar loan to build a refinery. The site he had chosen was 1.5 miles from downtown Cleveland on a narrow waterway called Kingsbury Run. If Rockefeller had not included 2 carats to his proposal, the bank directors certainly would have scoffed at his request for a loan, since 27 other refineries were being built in Cleveland. The first carat was the fact that the Erie Railroad planned to lay track next to Rockefeller's proposed site. This development meant that John D. would have little difficulty in transporting the oil from his refinery to locations throughout the country. The second carat resided in Rockefeller's rebate scheme. If the Bank of Cleveland provided him a promissory note of unlimited funding, he intended to secure rebates from the owners of Erie for every barrel of oil that was carried on their freight cars. The scheme was not complicated. Rockefeller would guarantee Jim Fisk and Jay Gould, the owners of Erie, massive daily shipments of refined oil on their railroad line. Such a guarantee would be tantalizing to the 2 railroad barons, since the freight business had become incredibly competitive. In exchange, Fish and Gould would provide Rockefeller with a rebate on all his shipments. It was a grandiose scheme that involved a clandestine kickback. It reeked of grave illegality, since it threatened to eliminate any possibility of fair and equitable competition. The Rothschild Bank. But the scheme ran far deeper than a simple kickback. John D. would also demand from Fisk and Gould a rebate on every barrel of oil shipped by his competitors. No other refinery could hope to remain in business under such conditions. His competitors would be forced to sell their holdings to Rockefeller at rock-bottom prices. Regarding the scheme, prominent Rockefeller critic Ida M. Tarbell wrote, "Men generally held then, as now, that it was not fair for the railroads to allow one shipper a better rate than another. The common law was known to disapprove the practice. The theory that the railroad held its right-of-way from the people, and therefore must be just to the people, treating them without discrimination, was familiar enough, so familiar that the railroads never dared show favoritism, save secretly. But under threats of loss of business, under promise of larger or more regular shipments, under chances of sharing in the profits of the enterprises they favored, they did do it secretly. That is, rebate-giving then, as now, was regarded as one of those lower business practices which characterize commerce at all periods, and against which men of honor struggle, and of which men of greed take advantage. Naturally, one would expect Mr. Rockefeller to spurn such an advantage. The one thing for which he was conspicuous outside of his zeal for business was his devotion to the church, one of whose cardinal teachings is, "Whatsoever ye would that men do to you, do ye even so to them." Naturally, one demands a man of his profession to be keenly alive to degrading business practices and keen to overthrow them. But although Mr. Rockefeller no doubt heard weekly from the pulpit that the law and the prophets were all summed up in doing as you would be done by, it is quite probable he had never seen any connection between the doctrine and railroad rebates. He was not an educated man. He had evidently never thought seriously of anything but making money. His religious training seems to have been purely formal, awakening him merely to the duty of attending to devotional exercises and giving to the church. So when he realized that the rebate was the means by which he could gain control of the oil industry in Cleveland, he went after it, ignorant of or indifferent to the ethical quality of the act. The brashness of the concept was breathtaking, and John D.'s scheme would have been repellent to any banker with a modicum of integrity. But, by happenstance, the young Rockefeller had walked into one of the 3 banks in the United States that would have been open to such a deal. This bank was owned, by the Rothschilds.